Good evening all. It is my great pleasure to introduce Charlotte Cushman, our keynote speaker for tonight. Char Cushman, along with her husband Dan, runs a Montessori school in Anoka. She's an active member of the local Objectivist club, and she's a writer who has been published in various periodicals. After graduating with a major in elementary education, Char undertook a training from a friend and colleague of Maria Montessori. After more than a decade of teaching in Montessori schools, Char started her own school and ran it for 15 years before joining the Minnesota Renaissance School, which is owned by her husband. Char became interested in politics ever since her mom's cousin and his sister escaped from the communist Yugoslavia, where they suffered under Tito. Hearing their stories of life under a dictatorship, at the age of 5, a shocked and frightened Char was motivated to fight for the principles of freedom ever since. She's actively involved in the Tea Party movement via the Minnesota Objectivist Association. Char has been published in periodicals like the Minnesota Parent, in many Montessori publications like the Montessori Life, and in political magazines like the People's Agenda, a newsletter of Putting People First, an organization which fights animal rights, and the online American Thinker. Two of my favorite articles by her, both published in American Thinker, are one, Life Under Communism, where she recounts the stories she heard as a child, and second, Save Western Civilization, Save Christopher Columbus. You can find it online. Char is a dear friend of mine. I teasingly call her my knitting and quilting friend. She's always proudly displaying her beautiful creations on her Facebook page, leaving me to wonder where and how she finds the time to knit and quilt in between her intellectual pursuits, her career, and all the fun she seems to be having with her 2 teenage daughters and the rest of her family. Well, I too proudly carry and display this bag. It says, "Don't tread on me." Char made it for us. I had to pay her $3 for it. That's right. I had to pay her money to get rid of some of her old jeans. Welcome to my local Tea Party, my dear friend, Char.
Thank you for inviting me to come here to speak. This subject is very near and dear to my heart: education, children, and of course America. I don't think I need to convince this audience of the gravity of what we are facing in our country today. Our nation is teetering on the brink of socialism, and the prosperity we have been fortunate enough to have in America is in serious danger of disappearing. Some may wonder, how could this happen in the first country in the world to recognize individual rights? Surely the American people will see the difference between the United States and third world countries, and how progress and wealth is much better than stagnation and poverty. It should seem so obvious, but it isn't. And the reason why it isn't is because the government educates our children. And we now have a nation full of people who don't know how to use their minds. People easily believe what is spoon-fed to them by the media, accepting its negative slant on capitalism as the gospel truth. They believe what we are told without question. They listen to a politician say something one week, but forget what he said the next month, so aren't aware that he is inconsistent. Indeed, even inconsistency is not a problem for many people. It is accepted as normal. Once, while talking to a liberal, I pointed out his discrepancy when he stated how horrible technology is. And he states this on his computer. He saw no problem with that. You know what he said to me? Why, contradictions are to be expected. I kid you not. If contradictions are normal, then there is no way of knowing right from wrong, truth from fiction, and therefore one can't be sure of anything. This is a serious situation, indeed a dire situation, for it sets the stage for dictatorship. People who are sure of nothing will believe anything. A dictatorship needs blind followers, conformists, those who are willing to obey. It needs sheep, and this is what our government schools have produced, a nation of sheep. In order to understand how this has happened, we first need to understand why do we need education in the first place? Man does not have instincts for survival. If he were to go out in the woods, he would not automatically know which berries are poisonous and which ones are not. Similarly, he does not automatically know which political system, capitalism, or socialism is life-sustaining and therefore moral. He has to figure these things out by thinking critically using the facts of reality. Since man's means of survival is his mind, the purpose of education is to teach the child how to think. Thinking doesn't mean that you're able to spout off a lot of dates, facts, and information. Those things can be memorized. Thinking is the process of identifying and integrating the facts of reality through the process of reason. A person who can think makes connections from one concept to another, can identify and resolve contradictions, can figure out solutions to problems, and can figure out the causes of events. In other words, he can connect the dots. In order to do this, he has to be able to think in principles. But children cannot think in principles. They don't do this because they are operating at the perceptual level. They are very concrete bound. If you tell a child not to throw rocks at cars because it is dangerous, he may then throw sticks at cars instead. It's because he hasn't formed the principle that it is dangerous to throw anything at cars. Once he can formulate principles in his mind, he rises above the perceptual level of functioning to the conceptual level. This is what distinguishes us from the rest of the animal kingdom, the fact that we can conceptualize. It is the reason why man has created airplanes and cures for diseases, and animals have not. But thinking does not happen automatically. It takes effort, and it has to be learned. There are two types of learning: memorization, which is the perceptual level, and understanding, which is the conceptual level. If you want children to learn how to think, there's a very specific way that knowledge should be presented to them so that they understand what they learn rather than just memorizing it. And progress to the conceptual level. There are many aspects to this, but I just picked 6. Number 1, sensitive periods. A lot of people aren't aware of this, but children have sensitive periods for learning. A sensitive period is a time in their life where they are naturally drawn towards learning certain things. We don't sit down and say to children, I'm going to teach you how to crawl. Today I'm going to teach you how to walk. Today I'm going to teach you how to talk. There's certain time in their life where they're naturally drawn to doing that. They observe us, they eventually do it. If they don't do it during those sensitive periods, it's a lot harder to do it later on. There's sensitive periods not only for crawling and walking and talking, but sensitive periods for things like concentration. There's sensitive periods for addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, grammar, for everything. So, like I say, if those sensitive periods are not met, and it's presented to the child at an older age, it's a lot harder. It's just like when we try to learn a foreign language, like Pooja, she talks about my accent. But when you try to learn a foreign language when you're an adult, it's much, much harder. And it's harder to make those sounds. Number 2, reality. The child has a need to understand the world around him. He wants to know reality. In order to do it, he needs to experience many concrete objects so that he can integrate that information and develop concepts which will verify and solidify what he is learning. When the child knows facts firsthand, he is sure of what he knows and develops confidence in his mind to deal with the world. And the objects that he uses, for the most part, should be self-correcting so that he can tell for himself if he got something right or wrong. 3, order. One needs to understand basic concepts before learning the more abstract ones. Therefore, facts need to be presented chronologically. Letter sounds need to be learned before reading, obviously, and reading has to happen before comprehension and then grammar. In math, a child needs to understand a whole number before learning fractions and so on. Seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? Order is a starting point for logic. 4, repetition. The child needs to be left alone to repeat what he learns over and over until he understands it, and he needs to master one concept before going on to the next. It's just like when we learn a musical instrument. Do we do it by doing it only once? You practice over and over and over and over and over until you finally learn it. And then once you learn it, you do it again because it feels so good. That's the way children learn. That's the way they learn how to read. That's how they learn grammar. All those things is by doing it over and over and over. That way he can learn in a step-by-step manner, gradually moving from the concrete towards the abstract thought. And by doing so, he feels competent. 5, independence. Rather than learning blind obedience to someone else or to his teacher, a child needs to be able to trust the validity of his own mind. There is a big difference between a child who won't steal a car because he would make an authority figure angry, and the child who won't steal a car because he has figured out it is the wrong thing to do. 6, individuality. The child needs an individualized, safe learning environment where he is treated and respected as an individual. Is this the way the child is educated in most schools today, in our government schools? No. Sensitive periods are not even acknowledged, let alone met. As a matter of fact, most of the time, subjects are presented way too late, when the sensitive period has passed and now the subject matter is too difficult. Did you know that the sensitive period for grammar is age 7? When I got it, I was 12. Facts are not presented in order. The curriculum skips all around here and there and everywhere. Indeed, many important subjects are glossed over or not even covered. I am appalled at the people I have met that don't know who Patrick Henry was or where Oregon is on the map. The child in our government schools is not given self-correcting objects to learn from and is therefore reliant on the teacher to tell him if he is right or wrong. This makes him dependent on what someone else says is the truth. He is not allowed to practice until he grasps something, and often a subject is presented only to move on to something else before he is ready. Or he is forced to share. He's forced to share so he can't practice the activity on his own